Hi, I'm Jeff Terrell, Program Director with Fenton Fitness and Athletic Center, checking in at the end of week 7 of the Hotdog and Cereal Diet Challenge. So the last 2 weeks I sort of flaked out, did not get any updates. 2 weeks, that was just after Thanksgiving and the weight was up, so I just sort of skipped that one. There wasn't much to talk about, and then last week it just got to about halfway through the week before I got a chance to actually sit down and do a video, and at that point it was already so close to today that I decided to pass on that too, so apologize for that. I will try not to let those big gaps happen again. So last check-in with you guys was just before Thanksgiving, so we'll sort of update what's been going on since then. So after Thanksgiving week, actually Thanksgiving wasn't horrible, but calories were a little high that day. That weekend though was my wife and son's birthday, so went out on a date, went out to dinner and everything with the family and stuff, and did quite a high amount of caloric damage on that weekend. So I came in the Sunday after Thanksgiving, there in the birthday parties and everything, and ended up sitting in at the second highest weigh-in from the start of this, actually at 198.6. That's probably was not reflective of true body fat accumulation or body fat gain, since the resting pulse rate was still it was lower than all the previous readings, barring a 2. Blood pressure was on the lower side still, compared to previous readings, but nonetheless weight jumped up quite a bit there. Last week was back down to 194.6. Pulse rate was the lowest reading to date last week, down at 60 beats per minute. I remind you, started at 85 beats per minute. Blood pressure is 130/90, so a little high on the blood pressure still, actually, especially the diastolic. I'm not really sure what was going on with that. And then body fat percentage is at 15.6%. So this week's weigh-in, we hit a new record low. So it was at 193.8 pounds. Again, reminding we started at 204 pounds. That was a night weigh-in though, so let's say we started at 200 pounds. So we're basically down just over 6 pounds in 7 weeks, which might seem slow, but that's fine with me because this is not a quote-unquote diet per se. This is just, getting my weight down to a maintainable 185 to 190 range and trying to keep it there for a few years and see what that does for blood pressure, heart rate, and just overall general health and well-being. So, like I said, lowest weigh-in was this weekend at 193.8 pounds. Started at 204 pounds. Resting heart rate was at 62 beats per minute, up a couple beats from last week, but nonetheless started at 85 beats per minute, down to 62 beats per minute. Blood pressure was at 127/77. We started off at 138/90. And body fat percentage was at the lowest reading at 15.4%. Indicating that we're losing a little bit of lean body mass, which is pretty typical, especially if you're not obese to begin with. That as you lose weight, you will lose some lean body mass. I prefer that not to happen. So we're going to maybe try to bump the protein intake up just a little bit. Try to be a little more diligent with getting more sleep and consistently, and see if that can help us hold on to a little bit more lean body mass as we go through this. Nutrition summary, didn't get the data put in for today, but I'll sort of go over the last 2 weeks since I didn't do those updates anyway. So 2 weeks ago, the average calories were 3,100 calories a day. Last week, they averaged out at 3,000 calories per day. Fat intake was at 124 grams per day 2 weeks ago and 118 grams per day last week, which puts us right around 35% of calories coming from fat. Saturated fat was at 42 grams and 35 grams respectively over the last 2 weeks. Cholesterol 300 milligrams and 229 milligrams respectively over the last 2 weeks. Sodium was 4,400 milligrams and 4,300 milligrams, so the highest readings to date. And yet blood pressure is still coming down a little bit. Carbohydrate intake over the last 2 weeks. So 2 weeks ago, actually I guess closer to 3 weeks ago now, was 330 grams per day. The week after that was 309 grams per day. So both those times actually we were at right around 42% of caloric intake was coming from carbohydrates. So that was the largest macronutrient, was carbohydrates. Fiber was at 42 grams 3 weeks ago, 48 grams the week before or the week after. Sugar intake was at 119 grams 3 weeks ago and 90 grams per day last week. So of that 330 grams of carbohydrates 3 weeks ago, over a third of that was from sugar. And then protein was at 100, let's see, 3 weeks ago was at 151 grams, and then last week 168 grams. So like I said, I'm going to try to bump those numbers up a little bit, but we're falling right around 19% and 23% of caloric intake coming from protein. So those are sort of the nutrition metrics. Like I said, weight's still coming down. Have a couple weeks before Christmas, so we'll see if we can get another pound and a half off before then. Sort of targeting long-term, thinking that roughly, around mid-February, end of February, we can get down to that 185-pound mark. But we'll see what happens with Christmas and New Year's and my birthday and all that good stuff. Wasn't really going to do any performance metrics until we get to the end, or maybe like a halfway. But interestingly, with the training, just sort of noticing some different numbers going through training. So the hang clean, when I started this out, my test of the 1 rep max was at 215 pounds for 1 rep was the hang clean 1 rep max. And I did that for 3 sets of 3 this last week. So already doing the previous max for 3 sets of 3, while dropping weight, while eating unhealthy foods or not performance enhancing foods, I guess you might say. And my 100-foot Jacob's ladder climb at the beginning was at 38 seconds. I did that in 35 seconds this last week in training. So a couple numbers that wasn't testing per se, but just sort of noticed that those have improved significantly from the start. So that is the week 7 update. This next week, we're still sticking with the Kogel's skinless beef frankfurters for the Kogel hot dogs of choice, and we going to give the Cocoa Pebbles a break and give a Cinnamon Toast Crunch a go this next week for some variety on the cereal side of things. So thanks for watching. Check in next week.